All right. Welcome, everybody, to the latest edition of Wino with Rhino. Special guest today, very special guest, is Coach Steve Mellor. He is actually my coach. We can get into that a little bit here in a minute. But super impactful guy. I'll give you a few words about Steve. So he is from, how do you say it again in England? It's up there.
Oh, Cheshire. You got Cheshire. You got Stockport, Cheshire. Yeah, that's where I'm from originally. Yeah.
And so he was an avid swimmer, world-class swimmer. He became a coach at LSU. He coached. You were the associate head coach from 2015 to 2021. In 2020 and 2021, he trained Brooks Curry for the U.S. Olympic swim trials. Go ahead and interrupt me where I get any of this inaccurate.
That's right.
Grew up in Stockport, Cheshire, England. He is a podcast host, Growth Ready Podcast. He's an executive coach, owner of Career Competitor, high performance coach, and professional speaker. He is a professionally certified coach, which requires over 500 hours of coaching. The man's a coach. Okay, I think you get it. So the reason he's here today, so this podcast is really all about people that I'm aligned with, that have a passion for what they do, and they put a lot of good out into the world, and we have some type of connection between us. And for Steve and I will say that connection has very much been around, we love to empower other people and help people reach their potential. We see potential in people, specifically high performers, and that's an area where Steve and I spend a lot of time is how do we, one, find these high performers that want to learn and grow and perform even better, and then how do we impact them as well as impact each other. So Steve is as good as I have seen at what he does. He is a great force to the world. I'm grateful he's in my world, and I'm super excited to have you on the podcast, buddy.
I appreciate you for all those words, even the ones that were pronounced with an American accent. The England forgives you. It's okay.
Well, we're going to get into your American accent
That's
a little
right.
bit here.
That's right.
So, Steve, one of the things we do with this show is we start off with a connection around some type of beverage.
Mm-hmm.
And so why don't you tell us what we've selected today and why it might be what we selected to drink together.
Yeah, so it's funny, man. So give you a little bit of a story with it. My wife and I have now been together. We actually met almost 8 years to the day, and we met over what was supposed to be one drink that turned into three. That's where the night ended. Don't let your minds go there, people. And what I came to learn was that there was a ton about just drink and alcohol that I just simply did not know. I thought I was somehow a connoisseur, and my wife, beautifully in the way that she does in so many ways, proved me wrong. And so she has taken me on just a complete crash course of wine in the last 8 years. And her standard is high. It's very high. And so as we started getting to work and I learned more and more about you, and you shared with me that there's this wine that you've been helping make for a long time now, or at least funding to make.
It's more accurate.
Even more accurate. I was like, well, I got to get a bottle of this stuff at some point, right? And took it home and told the wife, I said, hey, we got a bottle of wine tonight. And Robbie, when she took a sip, I've never seen that response from her over a drink. She literally looked at me and then took another sip, and she said, Steve, this might be the best red wine I've ever drank in my life.
Wow.
And I picked up the phone right away and sent you a text and said, with a picture of the wine and like, hey man, we're drinking it, and arguably the hardest taste to please.
Wow.
Tells me that you blew her away. So happy to be sharing another bottle of it right now, brother.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
What's interesting is if no one listens to this podcast, they're going to hear what you just said, because we're going to put it all over the marketing material.
That's right.
For my wine.
That's right. That's right. You've got an avid marketer right here. So,
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, cheers, buddy.
Cheers, brother.
Even though we're not on camera.
Absolutely. Still good.
Nah. Yeah. So I get asked a lot of questions whenever I'm coaching and mentoring folks, or just having a conversation with somebody that wants to figure out how to get to where they want to go,
Mm-hmm.
right? Hey, not only how did you decide what you wanted to do, what you wanted to be, but what were the steps you took? Like, how did you actually start making progress in that? And so you do a lot of public speaking, and I've heard you as a keynote tell your story. I'm not asking you to rehash your story, but maybe in a different slant of that is touch on the history of the coaching, where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
But I really want you to get into what drove you and compelled you to want to be a coach, like in general.
Yeah, I always find it interesting because I think when people discover what it is they want to do with their life, it usually comes in two forms. One is that you somehow get exposed to something really early and you're like, that's it. I want to be that. I want to do that. Which was not me when it came to the coaching side of things. And then the other form I always notice is that you find what it is you have a passion for, or you have an ability for, and you go far enough along where you suddenly realize you're pretty good at it. And then you start to retroactively go, okay, where were the seeds planted for this? Like, how the hell did this thing ever actually become what it's become? Which was me. And I now get to say I can look back as early as 12, 13 years old. I don't think I've ever told this story actually publicly.
Nice.
It's not that juicy, but it's good. It's a good one. I was a average at best soccer player, and I had a father who was fortunately there at the right time in my life to tell me that. he was like, "Hey, listen, I know you're all in on this soccer thing, as we call it, football, but you need to know that it's a no. It's just like, because he let me have something that, outside of like being sat down and your parents telling you they're getting divorced. That's about the worst thing you can hear at 12 years old as a Northwest English guy. So he let me know, but he's like, hey, you have this ability in sport to not only, when you decide what you want to do, go do it, but bring other people along with you. And you do that in abundance, so you shouldn't give up the soccer. Just keep doing it. Keep doing it. Keep being that person for the team, for the high school team, all this kind of thing. But there's this swimming thing that you're doing right now, and I think if you get serious with it, you could go somewhere. And that's not necessarily what the story's about, but obviously I went on and did the thing with swimming. But that first piece, I didn't realize it at the time, but I just thought it was just like this way of him cushioning the blow. It's like, yeah, keep doing it. Keep doing your football, Steve. It's fine. It's fine. But really what he was helping me see was like who I was, not what I did or what my talent was. And something I would always do whenever we would go with the high school team and play soccer is that we would go and we would play a game. If it was an away game, play the game, we get back on the little minivan, the bus, whatever. And then I would replay the game on the bus for the guys in like an announcer's voice. So I would just for fun. So I would just do the build up to the goal, the ball going in, and then pretend as though it was like a game that was being watched by, thousands, when really it was just a couple of parents. And the guys just freaking ate it up every single time. And it literally got to a point where it was like we would end the game and we would want to get on the bus so Steve could do his announcing thing. Awesome. Yeah. And I didn't realize it at the time. Again, years hindsight were able to help me see this. But I was acknowledging what we did. I was helping people. Like I was people that were just thought we were playing a game of soccer in front of next to no one. We were getting on a bus afterwards, and the guys felt awesome about themselves when I would do this thing, because it would highlight what we did, and I would try to involve like every player on the team in the build up to goals and all this kind of thing. And again, you do something like that as a kid just for the fun and the laughs and all that kind of thing at the time. But at the heart of it, I enjoyed doing it and I wanted to do it. And I suddenly, as I look back in, many years into the past, once I figured out where I was going with this profession, I was able to see so many seeds like that planted along the way. Like once I really got serious in my swimming, it was never enough for me just to get good. It was like, who can get good with me? Like who else can be good at this, or should be good at this, or is having a tough day and needs to be picked up. And then lo and behold, the moment came when I finished my swimming career, had a shoulder surgery immediately afterwards, and this was circa 2009 now. So I've come to the US by that point. I'm swimming in college. So I'm in college. Got shoulder surgery, fresh off the back of the ACC championships my senior year, and I'm just at practice hanging out, and my arm's in a sling, and I'm watching the guys train. And one of the guys comes to the wall, and I watch him do something. I'm like, "Yo, what the hell was that?" And just like, "What?" I'm like, "You can't do that. If you that's gonna happen again." And like, I'm just coaching. I didn't realize I was doing it, but I just boom straight into it and coaching. And he didn't yell at me. He didn't get pissed. He went, "Oh, thanks for that." And I'm like, "Uh-oh, I enjoyed that. That felt really good."
Wow.
Like I just said something and someone heard it, appreciated it, and then I watched them push off the wall and apply it. And I'm like, "Oh, that felt really good. I think I want to do that more." And that was kind of it, man. That's how it started. But all these seeds were planted up to that point that I was able to eventually go back in hindsight, and obviously be able to detect.
Yeah.
So
you, in a lot of your speaking engagements, you talk about that transition from being a swim coach to an executive coach, if you will. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not capturing that correctly, please let me know. But speak to, I guess, the difference between, okay, you're a college swim coach, to making the decision that you've got all these opportunities in front of you. You just coached a guy to the Olympic swim trials, and you're at pretty much the peak of what it means to be a coach, especially in the college ranks. Mm-hmm. And then you have this epiphany that, yeah, I'm very committed to be a coach, but now I have clarity that maybe it's not this type of coach. Mm-hmm. Like what was that process like for you? And then walk us through, once you made that decision, how final it was and the steps you took after that to just go, right?
Yeah. So again, this is another one of those wonderful moments in marriage where my wife gets to look back and tell me how right she was. But so I started this podcast in 2018, and this was 3 years before I eventually decided that I was going to be done with swim coaching. And as I start the podcast, and at first I'm like reading everything you're supposed to read about podcasts. I'm like, okay, so you got to have this amount of questions, and this is how you record, and and 10 episodes in, I'm like, why do I feel like I'm podcasting with a straitjacket on? Like, I don't feel like I'm actually doing this for the reason I wanted to. And what was interesting is my athletes were the ones that encouraged me to do a podcast in the first place. They were like, "Steve, like, all you do is tell us stories. All you do is like stop us before practice for 2 minutes to get our heads right. But you don't do it by saying, 'Hey, get your head out your ass.' You tell us a story. So why don't you do something around that?" And so anyway, the podcast was born. And again, I didn't find myself authentically doing it. I found myself doing it based on whatever terms I was supposed to do a podcast on at that time, which again was still somewhat unknown in 2018. And slowly but surely, I just started inviting people on and said, "Listen, I'm not going to have any questions. I'm going to know who you are. I'm going to do my research, and then I'm just going to use what I do with any person on this planet and let my curiosity run its course and see what we produce." Yeah. And 10 episodes turned into 50, turned into 100 really quick. And before I knew it, I blinked and it was 2021. And for about a year and a half heading into that summer where I coached Brooks to the Olympic trials, eventually the US Olympic team, eventually where he went and got an Olympic gold medal. Here I am at the top of this mountain in many ways as a swim coach, feeling not what I thought I would feel at the top of that mountain. I'm like, don't feel like this is where I'm supposed to be, guys. Like I'm in these US swim coach meetings for the Olympics now with other coaches that have been there and done it a couple Olympics. And I'm like, I have nothing in common with you. I got nothing in common with you. Like I don't feel like I belong in this room. Why do I feel that way? And so, as I was saying, like as the podcast grew, I was getting this really cool feedback from executives like yourself who would sit down at the end of it and go, "This was not what I expected." I'm like, "Oh, is that a good thing?" And they're like, "It's a great thing. Like this was unique. You clearly aren't coming with questions. You're listening to what I'm saying, but then you're also building upon what I'm saying, and therefore you're asking better questions." And I said, "Cool, thanks." And then I would say, "All the best, take care, thank you," and get back in my car and go back to swim practice. And then after a while, I would tell Brittany this, my wife, and she's like, well, I think there's something there. Like, maybe not the podcast, because if you become a professional podcaster, our children won't eat. But at the same time, it's like there's a skill set that you're using that maybe could be used elsewhere, that you're not able to really use to the best of your ability in the world that you were in as a swim coach. And she was right, you know, and I kept thinking about it, kept sitting on it. And it took something as incredible as putting a kid on a U.S. Olympic swim team, the first of their kind for swimming at LSU, to be like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. I should be doing something that aligns more with who I am at my core. And to your point, 3 months after that historic moment, I'm like, it's time to go. It's time to be done. There's a few other moving parts in that too, which we may or may not get to. But at the same time, at the heart of it, it was just getting that absolute clarity. And the way I describe it on stage now is the reality of the situation came to me while I was stood on the poolside 3 days after Brooks had achieved what he achieved. And I'm like, Steve, you've never been a swim coach, but you've always been a coach of swimmers. So you're a coach first. Swimming was just a convenient world for you to do that in. It made sense, and it made sense for as long as it made sense for, and now it no longer makes sense. Now you need to go do this thing that I personally believe God put me on this planet to do. Now you need to go do it in a world where there's an even greater demand for it, where the ceiling is non-existent in so many ways. So
powerful stuff, man. I'm curious, and I think a lot of people, when they hear that story, I know I've heard it in great depth before, some of the things that pop up for me. So here you are, you have that moment of clarity, and you have these moments in your life where two very powerful forces, one your father, one your wife, that are giving you insight into something that maybe is a blind spot for you, right? So having those super powerful relationships with people that you have all the trust in the world in. One, how do you not be resistant to that level of feedback or defensive about it, right? How many times do we, push away the people that care about us, trying to help us, right? And we're just making sure they don't help us, kind of thing. How did you let that in? And the second question is, what was there a level of fear when you had the epiphany, when you finally understood it, when you had that moment of clarity? Was there any fear in that? And if there was fear, what tools were accessible to you to address that and move forward through that?
Yeah, I'll answer this. I'll answer the second part first, actually, because for me, one of my just parts of my DNA, and I have no idea where the heck it came from, because it sure as hell didn't come from my parents, is just conviction. Like this personality trait of just conviction. And when someone gives me an ounce of direction, and if the direction is coming from a trustworthy place and there's enough logic to it, I'm not only have you got me, but that conviction alone is enough for me to do the rest. And that's kind of what I'm hearing in that second part of the question, is like the tools. It's how do you solidify conviction in your mind? Because we are going to second guess. We are going to, lose trust in ourselves. We are going to doubt. But for me, my formula, if you will, is trustworthy source, and then just a very clear direction around it. If those two pieces are there, and I can really sit with that and intuitively feel good about that, then that's enough. I'm convinced, and I'm going to go.
Interesting.
And that both of those stories speak to that. Is if my dad's a trustworthy source, gave me that direction. Same with Brittany, trustworthy source, and said, like, I think there's something here. But going back to the first part of the question, I wasn't ready to say yes in either of those situations when they both said that. I didn't want to say yes. I'm a 12-year-old who loves soccer. I've got all my posters on my wall, all my favorite players. Every Christmas present, birthday present I got was the latest jersey or whatever it was of my team, Liverpool. And I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. Yeah. However, because of the trustworthy component and because of the clarity of direction, even begrudgingly, I can get on board.
Wow.
Even begrudgingly, I can get on board, because those two pieces are so important for me. And even the funny part of the second story with Brittany is there's a couple times where she's heard me publicly tell that story without acknowledging the role she played.
She quickly reminded me.
And every time I'd sit down right next to her afterwards and be like, I know. I'm sorry. Hit me later. Don't hit me in public. Like. But again, that's the fun for me now, is that I get to look back and say, okay, there are very, very few roads that I have walked in this life up to this point that didn't start with those two things, like some sort of trustworthy source to say, you need to give this some thought, and then at least some form of a direction that came with that suggestion too.
Beautiful. Love that answer. So to continue to play with you in the coaching space, when you're coaching somebody that maybe has those two components and they're at a crossroads in their life, where they had a trustworthy source and there was logic to it, it made sense, but maybe they lack what you have, which is that conviction component. They feel it's the right thing, they think it's the right thing, they want to move forward, but maybe they're in their own way for various reasons. And I know I can't ask you to go into too much specifics here because I'm asking you a fairly vague question, but where do you begin with that when somebody's like, I know I need to make a change. I know this is the wrong path. I have clarity on what I think the right path is, but I don't know what the first step is. And for a lot of us, not knowing something prevents us from taking the action, right? I mean, it's kind of logical. So how would you start to coach to that? What questions would you start with in that situation?
Yeah, I think it makes me think right away, like when I first started the business, I started telling people around Baton Rouge, Louisiana, that I'm an executive coach, and every 99 times out of 100 people would be like, what's that? And then I'd tell them my swimming background, and they go, so you're an executive coach for swimmers? And I'm like, no. No. What I do is I help people get out of their own way. And then people immediately go, oh, man, I need that.
There was that American accent.
Yeah. I was like, oh, wow, I really need that. I'm like, okay, cool, we should have a chat. But my point there being is that, just to kind of repeat part of what you said there is, yes, we are always going to be the first person that's going to get in our own way. Question is, I like to ask is like, hey, what is it in your journey where you've been proven that it was right for you to not take action? Where have you been proven that by not taking action, you were right to not take action? And I get a lot of silence. I go, okay, now let's go to the other side. Where have you been proven that when you took action, you were proven correct? And we usually get a little bit of a quicker response. However, we always have to ask the question, when you did take action and then you ended up going down a path that was not good for you, typically that's when the gates come wide open and someone just pours out a whole bunch of stuff. Like, oh, I made this mistake. And I was like, okay, so let's talk about what we've just learned. One, few things have happened in your life by just choosing not to take action. Two, when you have successfully taken action before. And three, you have a ton of evidence of what can happen when you get it wrong that you can potentially learn from. So now knowing all that, and this is question 4, what do you want to do about that? Because in that is this thing called the truth. Like, we've just learned a ton about ourselves by answering those 3 questions. So the question then becomes is like, if this thing that you claim is so important to you, that you want to pursue and you want to do, and yet knowing all of this, you still choose to do nothing about it, then my immediate question to you is that this thing that you claim is so important is not as important as you're making it. So what do you need to do to get past that part of it? So we've got both sides of the situation. Then we can go back, we can ask those 3 powerful questions, get a ton of information, and feel super energized, super resourceful in terms of like, now I have everything I need to know, I'm off on my way. But the other part of it too is like, if we're still in inaction at that point, then what we do have is a big bag of truth. Question is, do you want to open it and take a look inside? And that's a whole different discussion. That has nothing to do with the initial investigatory work that we actually did. And I did this with athletes all the time. Athletes all the time. It's like at the beginning of the season, I want to do this. It's great. 3 months into the season, we're exhausted. Morning workouts. Louisiana is actually getting a little cold. It's like, this isn't as fun anymore. that great idea that I had at the beginning of the year of what I wanted to achieve doesn't seem as appealing anymore.
Yeah.
And my question was always the same. Has the goal changed? No. Then what's the problem?
Yeah.
What's the problem? And just like, again, just very little response. And it's like, whenever the goal changes, let me know. And I will treat you differently. I will train you differently. We'll do everything differently. But as long as the goal's the same, all of this stuff that you're bringing to the table right now, which is not helping the goal, put it in a bag outside.
Yeah.
Leave it there. He'll be there after practice. Let's get to work.
So there you go, audience. We just got coached up by Coach Steve Mellor together, and that first hit was for free.
Right.
Incredible stuff, man. You're just so natural, and that was so insightful. It truly is an honor for me to have you on the show, because like I mentioned before, Steve is my executive coach, as well as my entire executive staff. So there's 5 of us. He coaches us individually and also us as a group. And then so you really work with high performers, a lot of people that are executives, but not everybody that's an executive. Just really, I think you're drawn more to high performers. Mm-hmm. And so watching you go through just immediately the way your brain works, you immediately went into coach mode, and it was a beautiful thing to watch. It was very insightful. What I'm curious about now, with the amount of energy and alignment of purpose that you have in being a coach, how do you choose who you coach? Like, what is your gauntlet you run? Because you can't possibly give all of that to just anybody, right? Like, there has to be some conditions for you to agree to coach somebody. What do those look like?
No, I love the question, because it's just that it tells a story of the very short evolution of my 3-year business now. And you start a business, you work out of scarcity. It's like, you want coaching? You want coaching? You want coaching? So it's like, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'm giving it out right now. Anyway, so I spend the first about 6 months in that approach to my business. I say, hey, I think I'm doing this coaching thing. I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to work with this. And so I start working with a few clients, and for whatever reason, it's not what I thought it would be. And it's nothing against the individual. If you know that you received coaching from me in the first 6 months of my business, this is not a direct shot at you in any way, shape, or form. This is a 100% a Steve thing. Because the fact of the matter was, I came from elite in swimming. I worked my butt off as an athlete to become a very good swimmer with what I felt was a third of the talent. Like, my mind was always 3 times the work ethic, because you got a third of the talent. That was just how I did it. And the cost was my shoulders. That was literally it. But where I ended up getting to in swimming was this level of elite swimming that I was so accustomed to, that when I tried to go into a place of scarcity when I first started my business, I wasn't aligned with the person that I was potentially coaching. Suddenly now I'd gone from a place of, just to use like the Maslow's pyramid, for instance, like this totally at the top of the pyramid. You're just like, hey, everybody that I'm working with wants to be the best. Awesome. That's great, because I want them to be the best. And now it's like, I'll work with anybody. So now I'm right back at the bottom of the pyramid, and yet my mind is still at the top. So I'm like, okay, so this isn't going to work. So my goal from that point on was, how can I get my message out to people that it's like, hey, I want to work in high performance. And I now need to convince you that it's not important that I have worked in your industry at a high level. So again, I'm your executive coach, Robbie. You don't want to hire me to do anything within your organization other than coach.
Correct.
There is nothing I will be able to bring to your organization outside of coaching.
Until we have a Sigma swim team.
2025, couple people. And so like, that was a huge, huge barrier for me to break through when I first started. It was just like, how do people see me as elite when everything about my background was elite in something that is not the industry that I'm working with them in? Mm-hmm. And so the gap was, how do I get to that point where I am convincing people and working with people and saying, hey, this is about human performance. This isn't about being the best engineer. This isn't about being the best financial advisor. This isn't about being the best restaurateur. And that's just 3 examples of the kind of industries I'm working in right now. This is about human performance. And when I made that connection with my background in swimming, that's actually how I was coaching in swimming the whole time. That it wasn't about the X's and O's. It was about the relationships. It was about the personality, helping somebody get out of their own way and see their potential in a way that no one has ever helped them see it before. I realized that I'm trying to do the same thing in this space now too. And so once that was clear, it was amazing how the universe suddenly just turned around and said, here's a bunch of people that are high performers. Because I was walking around the streets of Baton Rouge. I was going into networking events. I was, even taking coaching courses with people that shared the same mindset that I had. And that for me is when we start to, and this goes for anybody working in any industry, I think, is that when you can align not only take the why you're doing what you're doing, but find the environment where you are at your best doing it, that's when you actually will start to receive greater opportunities for what it is you're trying to do in your career. If you're trying to be in every world with everyone, you are never going to have a way of standing out, and you're never going to become something that's an asset to anybody in the process. And for me, that's what I've been able to find now, a way of speaking to high performance, so that the moment I sit down with someone in a discovery meeting, just to come all the way back now, I do this at times, I go back to the question. To come all the way back to the question, when I sit down with someone in a discovery meeting, it's really easy for me now just to get 5 minutes into that thing and say, listen, I appreciate that you're really interested in this. At this time, I don't think I'm the right coach for you. I don't, because based on what you're looking for, it doesn't speak to what I specialize in, which is that of high performance. And I can give you a bunch of options of what you can do instead. And I've gotten really comfortable doing that, And so for me, like that's kind of how it's all happened. That's how I've found my people, so to speak. Yeah. But in a really interesting way, they've now been able to find me too. So
well, it's fascinating, and man, you stole my thunder. You answered like 5 of my follow-up questions. That was beautiful, actually. So what to put it in my language, I use a lot on this show, is alignment of purpose. I'm very big on that, and what it means to me is being connected to your why, right? That's kind of a catchphrase now, but really being connected to what you're doing, why, what drives you, understanding why it drives you, all the things, so that you can go out and live that and find that joy in bringing that out into the world, right? So you spoke a lot to your alignment of purpose there, but what you touched on, which is right where I was going, so it was a beautiful segue, is turning that into a monetary enterprise, right? Turning it into a business, and the compromises you make to your alignment or to your purpose, the sacrifices you have to make, they're kind of in competition with each other, right? And so can you speak to a little bit about making this a business, your profession, and what compromises you initially had to make against why you're doing this, and the type of people you wanted to coach maybe eventually? Because I think that ultimately, as you start a business, right, it's one thing to understand why you started it and that you're super jacked up and you're committed and convicted and you're all in, but it's another to go, I can't just poof and make this, monetized and marketable yet. So kind of speak to that struggle and give us some insight into that.
Yeah. So there's actually a piece of some of my own coaching work that I've done around, being coached, and even some of my work in therapy as well around my relationship with money that kind of speaks to all this. And I think it's important to mention both of those things as I answer this question, because if we are speaking specifically in business ownership, that's a relationship you got to figure out. Like if you don't have a clear understanding of how you feel towards money, what money means to you, and all this kind of thing, it's going to be tricky. It's going to be really difficult until you get clear on that. And so really what I mean by that, just to provide a bit more context, working class raised, never had anything fancy that most of my school buddies had. Typically my parents would suggest they might get me something just as it was coming out of fashion, out of style, The next, I'm going to date the crap out of myself. The next Sega system was being built. And I'm just like, they're like, hey, do you want this now? And I'm like, well, they built another one now. I'd love that new one. And they're like, no, because the old one's really cheap right now.
Yeah.
You know, it's because they got a new one. So like, can we talk about the new ones? Like, no, we're not talking about the new one. We're talking about the old one. And so, yeah, I was raised on that. And so for me, like, money was never something I saw, that I was around, that I knew. And here I am now, you know, many, many moons later, sitting down with someone and quoting them a price for my services. And the question I have to ask myself when I do that now is, how serious are you about the work that we're going to do? How serious are you about the work we're going to do? Because I know how serious I am. That's the only thing I can answer with 100% clarity when I go into any business engagement with anybody. I know how serious I am. I know what you're getting for the value that I'm asking you to pay. The question is, how serious are you? Because the fact of the matter is, I am proposing amounts of money to people now that 8, 10, 12, 14-year-old Steve wouldn't understand. You know, and I sit here comfortably proposing these numbers to people because I know what I'm bringing to the table, and I need them to understand what they need to bring to the table. And it's not just what they're comfortable paying. It has to be more than that, you know? So whenever it's the one thing I hear more than anything, and maybe there's other business owners hearing this right now that can relate. Love everything you're telling me, Steve, but man, I just can't. I don't think I can swing this right now. And it's just like, that's fine. That's fine. No judgment, no issues, no nothing. I'll be here. And when you come back to me, just so you know, chances are my rates will have increased. So, because I'm continuing to work on the quality of coach that I am. The product of a coach that I am with you today, Robbie, will be better a year from now because of the work I do around myself. And so my fees will always correspond to that.
I feel like you're warning me.
Kind of. But like, that's like, for me, when we think about value, and the hardest thing in my world is it's not an object you can hold. You're not buying something from me that's like, ooh, look, I got this new shiny thing from Steve that I paid whatever I paid for.
That's right.
No, this is an engagement where I'm bringing myself to the table, and I'm asking you to bring yourself to the table. And so putting a value on that, all I need to know is that my value corresponds to a way of answering that question. Are you serious about the work? And if they are, they'll invest. And that's how I see it.
Yeah, it's incredible. A couple of things came up for me while you were answering that. One is most people, myself included, are not good at putting a value on a service we're providing. Now, not in the engineering space. I'm real clear on how the metrics work here. I feel good about that. But more of if I'm playing in your space where I'm mentoring somebody, or if I'm trying to do something outside of running Sigma per se, it's difficult for me. I get very confused and like, well, they can afford it, or what. I get a story in my head, but ultimately what I've learned is when you don't tell what the value is, you're saying there's no value, right? And that really, what you just did was set the framework. Like, you removed that confusion out of what you just said and said, no, there's a value, and I'm telling you what it is. The question for you is not whether or not it's worth it. The question for you is, are you worth it? Like, are you going to put in the work? Because don't get distracted by the dollar amount. You'll figure that part out. It's how bad do you want to get leveled up, right? And so that was a beautiful way to put that. But to go back to one question, did you ever have to compromise that point of view because you didn't have the client base, or from an income level standpoint, did you have to maybe go, no, I can work with this person. It's not they're a great person and all those things. They don't quite want to play in the space that I ultimately want to play with my clients in, but I think I can help this person right now. Yeah. And maybe I can make some discounts or whatever to move them along, or maybe financially. Because a lot of times as business owners, we talk ourselves out of our own profit.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
But when we're trying to grow and survive, instead of getting in a place where we can thrive, where did you choose to make those exceptions? Because I think for a lot of people listening, they're like, man, that's awesome. I can't wait to get to that space. But how the hell do I get there? How can I afford what I got to do to get there a year or two from now. Right?
Yeah. This two ways I would answer that. One is that first 6 to 12 months was that in abundance. It was just like, hey, my wife gave me 6 months to start making money out of this thing. You know, we looked at the books and we're like, we can probably go 6 months without you making a paycheck. And so I was like, that's all I need. It's like I told you before. Mm-hmm. That's my clarification right there. Boom, conviction. Boom, let's go. Mm-hmm. And then, I'm going to make it sound bad.
Oh boy.
And then you get a month or two into making money, and she's like, okay, can we get some of that now? And I said, I thought I had 6 months until I needed to start paying you guys any money. It's like, that's not what I said. I said 6 months, 6 months, you know. So anyway, there's a whole story there, but, no, but I think that first 6 to 12 months, what it did is it helped me see, like, there's no, if I compromise the place where I'm at my happiest as a coach, then the way I show up as a coach won't be my optimal either. Mm-hmm. So the more I compromise on the front end, I will probably allow myself, you know, room to lower what I do and how I do it when I'm doing it. And that doesn't sit well with me. And I literally could feel it through the first year of building my business. It's like, I'm getting clients, I'm doing this thing, it's happening, and yet something about integrity, you know, my optimal self, as I call it now, and what I do, something was off. It just, my body was telling me that this wasn't what I wanted from this. And one of the first things I actually said to a client was that our bodies have a way of telling us what we need to hear. We have to just be willing to listen. Yeah. And I believe that to my core. Like, I think our bodies tell us daily, frequently, what we need to hear. And most of the time, sadly, we don't listen. And so for me, I was listening like crazy. So that was the first way I kind of answered that question, is like, just almost from like a, you know, like an equilibrium almost, like, sort of thing is kind of what comes to mind as I'm talking about this. It's like something just didn't feel in balance, in alignment through those first 6 to 12 months. And so I was aware of that, and I made some changes. The other part, though, I would say too, is as I made those changes around high performance, I got really clear on industries and the kinds of people that I wanted to be working with. And what I did is I would negotiate with myself and say, okay, I'm willing to take a hit here if it means getting my foot in the door here, where I know I want to be. I'll give you an example. Healthcare. Like, for me, the work that I do with folks like yourself, Robbie, the demand and need for it in the healthcare space is absolutely enormous. And yet they don't see it that way. They don't see it that way. And it's why leaders in healthcare are the most burnt out, are the most suffering with depression, with anxiety, all this kind of stuff. And the statistics are out there. So the fact of the matter is, how do I get my foot in the door? And I've started doing that slowly. The question becomes, once I'm in there, how quickly then do I sort of get my rates and my value and all that kind of thing aligned to where I want it to be? But for anyone listening to this, I would, if there's a certain market, if there's a certain client, if there's a certain customer that you know, it's like, listen, down the road, I want my entire book to be filled with these kind of people, then sure, take a hit to get in with those people to begin with. Mm-hmm. But no, at some point, going back to that first part of the answer, it's going to be okay for a while, but after a while, you are going to start showing up as a lesser version of yourself if you don't then align your value with what it should be.
Man, it's powerful stuff. Because to me, I listen to that less from the coaching aspect, more of a building a business and a brand standpoint, because you followed kind of the steps that are kind of my mantra of, we'll start with your concept and what is your alignment of purpose? What is your passion? What are you going to be unwilling to compromise on in your offer? What is your offer? Okay. You know that, you know why it's your offer. But then maybe what's your ideal client and defining that. And then what are your parameters? What are you willing to negotiate? And what I heard there was not that you devalued your offer, you invested in your offer. And that is a distinction that I want our audience to hear is if you're out there as somebody considering starting an enterprise, or you're in it and you're just trying to get some insight from people like Steve or myself or whoever on maybe how to take steps forward, there are compromises you have to make in business, but when you look at them more as an intentional discount and maybe even communicating to the client, this is what it's actually worth. But because I think you are my ideal client, I just need to show it to you. I need to prove it to you. I'm willing to give you this introductory rate, this introductory offer, because I'm convinced after a few months, you're going to realize you're getting one hell of an offer here, and you're going to want to continue the work. And now the pressure's on me to deliver. And now I have an opportunity to deliver. And then when we go to re-up this thing, you are absolutely going to pay the full price, because that is the value. And you're going to tell me that. That's my goal, right? It's just a beautiful, very positive way that's motivational forward, as opposed to sitting there building resentment that you're not getting the fees that you should and all that kind of thing. It's just a very smart, in my opinion, and very successful formula to move forward. And then it's up to you to deliver on your offer, right?
Yeah, and I appreciate all of that. And I think something you're really hitting on there is, do you buy into you?
Yeah.
You know, like
that's the key.
That's the key. Do you buy into you? Because for me, you know, without going into necessarily too much detail, like for me, my entire life was filled with people questioning my talent, my quality, my ability, my potential, fill in the gap. And so you get to a point in life where you go, okay, well, there's really only one person that actually matters, and it's you. If you see your talent, you see your potential, now go prove it.
Yeah.
And you don't need to do it for them. You don't need to let them know once you figure it out and get there. At the end of the day, that's the person. If you can impress that person in the mirror, everything else will honestly figure itself out. And so for me, like that's what I love doing with my business now, as it continues to grow, as I'm now in this incredibly blessed position to say, okay, shoot, I'm looking at work next year where I'm going to need some coaches. I'm going to need to get my own coaches. I'm going to coach them up. I need to teach them the growth ready way, Steve Mellor way, all this kind of stuff, however you want to put it. You go, okay, this is exciting. It's awesome. But coming back to me and my value and what I know it is, it's like, just stay true to that. Just hold on to that and say, okay, as you grow and as you do this, keep asking yourself that question. Is this hurting the value, or are you continuing to sort of hold on to that and be driven by that and be motivated by that and show up every day and meet that in the process?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So I have two more questions as they relate to business, and then we're going to pivot to a little audience engagement from our little friend over here. So I think my first question is, I know you have to be somewhat tactful in how you answer this, but when you make the decision that you no longer want to do business with someone, walk me through the process of one, coming to that conclusion, and then the timing once you've made that conclusion. Now, you've already established you're a convicted man, and once you make a decision, you're going, right? But the timing and the tact and how you handle that, especially in the world of coaching, but in any business, when you're quote unquote firing a client or letting a contract expire and not renewing, that kind of thing. Do you have any kind of tips or hints out there for people in a smart way to do that, that one, doesn't damage the relationship, doesn't damage the client, and also helps you feel good about, because you're in the space of helping people, right? And so when you make the decision that I'm not going to continue this, that can be a bit of a struggle mentally, like, is this counterproductive to what I've set out to do, kind of thing.
Right.
And so can you just kind of speak to what goes on for you in that process when you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, the college approach that I took was, it's not you, it's me. And it's not, and that doesn't work. But I love the question, because I have been in that situation a couple times, and going back to how I answered the previous question around just like knowing what you want, how you know the way you engage with a customer, with a client, whatever it may be. It's why it's so important on the front end to be so comprehensive about that, like so detailed about, this is what you're getting into, this is what comes with the service, because at some point you're probably going to have to hold them accountable to that. And so when that moment comes, you don't want to be sitting there trying to make stuff up and hoping that, hey, you know, oh, well, I don't want to do this anymore, so what can I tell them? What can I tell them? What can I tell them? It's like, no. Are they out of alignment with what it was that you presented they were committing to in the first place? And if you were detailed enough on the front end in terms of what they're signing up, you shouldn't be questioning integrity or anything like that in that moment when you have to make a decision. Same goes for anybody that's got a member of their team that they have to let go. If you're letting go of them for something that, for whatever reason, was never shared in the first place, that they were responsible for, then yeah, that's on you, and that's an integrity thing that you need to live with. But for me, that's why I'm so clear on the front end with everybody that I work with. This is what it is. This is what you're signing up for. This is what I'm bringing to the table. I even have it in my contracts. It's like the first page of my contract. It's like, this is what I expect of you, and this is what you can expect of me. That's pretty unusual to put in a contract, you know? And so for me, like, just, it's not just the service. It's not 12-month agreement, this amount of sessions. You know, it's not that. This is what I expect of me, and therefore you can expect of me, and this is what I expect of you. And you're signing on the dotted line, and I am then allowed to hold you accountable to that. And so I've had that situation happen at least twice, sort of 3 times. And so for me, it's like, okay, knowing that now and being able to share that with people and say that moment is actually a lot easier, because you can come back to, listen, let me just sit down and talk to you about what we discussed when we first started out on this path. And let me explain to you why we're no longer on that path.
That was such a powerful answer. And I actually want to go back and listen to that again, because in my personal experience, I'm engaged in several operating companies now, but I've been engaged in multiple in the past. Some of them successful, some of them had to end. But when I look back about my role and why maybe those didn't go the way I wanted, it always landed on, I was not clear on the expectations, right? And that person or partner or partners were also not clear with me on their expectations of me in that. And I do find that is almost like an epidemic in today's business world, is there's not enough due diligence on, one, what you expect your role to be in that, and also what you expect from your partner's role to be.
You
in
want the
that
sale, right?
relationship.
You want to make the sale. So you'll do anything you can, say anything you can, all this kind of stuff.
And I think there's way more really badass salespeople out there now than there are actual badass entrepreneurs. It's a very odd dynamic that I'm seeing happen throughout every industry right now, including my own, as there's really gifted salespeople, right? But in terms of truly effective entrepreneurship / leadership, a lot of it comes down to alignment of purpose, and then the clarity of expectation, right? Is getting very, very clear on what you expect for this engagement. And the beauty of that, you just captured why it's so important, is you now can hold people accountable and yourself accountable to that expectation. Like, there's no messiness in that. There's no gray in that. Hell, you put it in writing. I've signed your contracts before, and I'm like looking at it like, dude, I need to do that. Like, I need to have this in my engagements with people. This is so great, because we now have something we can always go back to that said, yeah, this is what we agreed to, and I'm either doing my part or I'm not, right? And so, and it makes those outs very logical, less emotional, very clean, and very professional. And you can do that in a pretty empathetic way, and kind of coaching them on the way out the door too. Like, hey, in your next endeavor, make sure you're clear on the expectation, and before you make the commitment, that you're going to, deliver on it.
And it goes back to even that little insight I made before about how I would communicate with athletes. It was like, you sat in my office, you told me your goals, you told me the plan for the year. I've committed to that plan. I'm giving you everything I told you I would give you to get there. And now you're not bringing it. Has the goal changed? The beautiful thing with a contract is, like, contract's a contract. Like, you sign that stuff.
Yeah,
it's like, hey, this is what you committed to. I can put that across the table anytime and be like, why are you not doing this part?
Yeah.
You signed and you said you would. And we can have a conversation around that first. And if there's a lack of clarity and a misunderstanding, then okay, we need to just go our separate ways.
I mean, and I'm thinking of it too, like, I do lots of deals, real estate stuff as well, and I have different partners and different things I do. But I actually want to go back and refine the operating agreements that I've created to actually put in there some behavioral expectations, not just who's doing what, but more of my expectation with joining you as a partner is that you're going to show up like this, and then here's what you can expect from me, right? Do you choose to still move forward with that? Because I want to make sure that we have a clarity there on how we're both going to show up in this engagement. I think I've resisted in the past because it feels formal, and as an engineer in business, always trying not to make people feel like I'm an engineer. But there is a beauty in that clarity. There's a simplicity in it, and people get to make a choice now.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of times where I'd get frustrated in the past when something wasn't working out, I'd have to go look in the mirror and go, well, you're upset with that person because they didn't meet your expectation, which you never told them was your expectation.
Right.
Right. And so there's a lack of integrity in that, to your point.
Yeah. And just to finish that, like you mentioned before, there's way too many salespeople and not enough good entrepreneurs. Like, I know I have lost business in my discovery meetings because I show up as a coach in those meetings.
Mm-hmm.
I don't show up as a salesperson in those meetings. And I actually can sit and know, like 24, 48 hours later, I'll send the email, hey, it was great, here's some information, I'll still follow up and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But even as I hit send, I'm like, this isn't going to work out. This isn't going to happen because I said something in that session, in that discovery call, where I'm like, hey, the way they responded in that moment, that was a level of accountability,
mm-hmm.
of coaching, or whatever it is that they're not accustomed to. And they made their decision in that moment, whether this was for them or not. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Because at least now, if they say no, that's fine. I'm not for you. Not a problem.
Yeah.
Not going to lose any sleep over that. But don't make this about the money. Don't give me an excuse that it's this or this or this. Tell me what it was. Tell me that I said something to you that made you realize what you were actually taking on. No one ever does.
Right.
But like that's my point is like, don't ghost me. Don't say, oh, the money's too much or whatever it is. Like, I saw that moment where you made your decision and it's fine. But I would so much rather than make that decision than commit to something that they're not capable of actually committing
That's
to.
right.
So
that's right. Good stuff, man. Well, one last question. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah here, but what is next? Like, what is the short term and what is the long term, just audacious goal for Steve Mellor with Career Competitor, with the Growth Ready podcast? Where do you want to see this thing go?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, I pride myself on answering all questions with nothing but honesty. And so for me, I strive to be the best at what I do. I just, for me, I can't do it any other way. I've tried. I've really tried. But I want to be the best at what I do. In this world of coaching, it's not like they're handing out a medal for that.
Right.
And there's, I don't think if there is, I need to find out what the competition is and start training for it now. But no, like for me, I want to be the best at what I do. And I know what that means. I know the work that's going to go into that. The more I work with clients like yourself that challenge me, that force me to show up as a great coach every single day, like, because the way I always see that is I appreciate the feedback. I love when my clients tell me, hey, I love being coached by Steve. They refer me, all this kind of stuff. The way I interpret that is I am busting my ass to show up as a great coach. That's the only way I hear that feedback. And so for me, it's like, well, keep doing it. If you want the feedback to keep coming, keep doing it. So that's the first way I answer the question. Secondly, as I alluded to before, like, it would mean so much to me. I was actually chatting with Brittany about this just last night. Like, as I look at these opportunities that I'm currently in discussions with around working with organizations where I get to bring in a team of coaches, for me, that's the challenge now. It's like, can you not only do this as the coach that you are, but do this as the leader and the facilitator and the business owner that you believe you're capable of becoming? And that's the piece where I know I still have the most amount of growth. And I'm really comfortable knowing that. I sit in that daily. I sit in that with curiosity, excitement, and just get to say to you now, like, hey, I've referred a book to you called $1 Trillion Coach, and it's not about a guy that made $1 trillion. It's about a guy that was responsible for coaching people that were worth $1 trillion. And it's an amazing book. If you love a good like hero story, this is a great book for that. But for me, it's about how many folks, how many Robbie Oliviers can I be working with that are hungry to succeed, hungry to grow, understand what comes with it, and put themselves in a position daily where they're like, hey, whatever happened yesterday happened. We've learned from it. We're ready to go again, and be the coach to those people that want to do the work. That's again, I can't give you an answer in numbers. I can't give you all that kind of stuff. But you've looked at my business plan. You've got an idea of where I'm going.
That's good stuff. I love
Yeah.
making you a little uncomfortable. That was
That's
fun.
right. I wasn't uncomfortable, man. I was just speaking the truth. That's
I
all.
love that.
That's all.
I love that. All right, we're gonna lighten it up. Miss Sarah Edwards, who you met Miss Sarah on our first podcast, if you watched that, where she actually interviewed me,
Yes, I saw that.
which was, I'm sure, excruciating.
Do you have your
painful
own?
for
Do
the
you have your own
audience.
podcast? Or you have a mic? So sorry.
Do you need the mic?
You need to.
So one of the things that I was listening and hearing was it says, do you buy into you? And I think that's really crucial, because whenever you have to look into the mirror and you see who you are, like, why are you doing what you do? And I was reflecting on that as y'all were talking. I'm like, man, I feel like a lot of times I'm doing it for not necessarily like others, but like for other people's praise and to be like seen in a certain view. But it's like, at the end of the day, am I actually like happy with what, because I'm really good at like pleasing a whole lot of different people. But how you were saying with your process of how some people just aren't aligned with you and what, obviously you bring to the table, like, are they bringing the same thing? It's like, man, am I doing that for others just to, say that I did it? Like, what's actually the purpose in it? So I think this was like really cool just to, be able to hear as a listener, to just kind of like start unpacking that for myself, because you're like, man, at the end of the day, you do have to look in the mirror and you're like, who am I doing this for? And like, do I actually believe in myself that like, what's actually the why in this all? So anyway, very, very insightful from that like little strategic point that, that we got from that. But
I will say, just to your point, is firstly, as Robbie knows, I have a way of saying things that force you to stop and go, damn, okay.
exactly.
I need to think. But the in this day and age, and this is more of like, I'm trying not to sound like I'm on a soapbox or anything like that, but we are in an age right now where we feel the need to satisfy hundreds upon thousands upon millions of people because we have access to that many people. And the sooner we realize that so few of those opinions matter, the easier it is for us to actually make progress. And that's the irony of the whole thing, is that we think by satisfying all these other people, that's how we progress.
Right.
And you're going to remember this quote because I say progress different to you guys. But that's the truth, is when you really anchor yourself and get clear, like, hey, who am I doing this for? Whose opinions really matter? A lot of the other fluff around that you can get distracted by at times, it kind of just goes away. And don't get me wrong, you can still show up on social media and still do all these things and still have all these followers and all that kind of thing. But if you're doing it for that, you're never really making any progress at all. You're getting too wrapped up in opinions
in the show, right?
And exactly. So yeah.
Let's go back to whenever you were speaking a little bit about your coaching. This was something that was said whenever I was coached in gymnastics. Leave all your baggage at the door. Just leave it. Like, we came here. The goal is still the same. We wanted to win an SEC championship followed up by a national championship. That was the goal that we set out each year. And so on our Monday meetings, that was always reiterated to us. Leave your baggage at the door. Come in. We're going to work out and we're going to do everything. And it was just one of those things, like you said, like the mundane, the everyday, it could kind of get so routine. But if you lost sight of that focus, sometimes you're like, oh, it didn't seem as sweet as it once did. So I guess my question is, in like the mundane things like that, sometimes, you have this goal that maybe is like 5-10 years out, but you need to stay hungry in between, because that is like the future goal. How would you say that like continuing the everyday is, I guess it's kind of a situation where you're at, like, we're constantly evolving, wanting to be the best version of ourselves.
Yeah.
But I guess like in this season where you're still continuing to search and like find that, what is like the biggest motivator for you?
Yeah, you hit on the word right there towards the end, season. I mean, it's we have to look at things. I literally sent an email out just today. I do like a mid-monthly message, and I spoke about this in my message today about, because we're in this, it's November right now. I don't know when this is going out, but we're in that season. Thanksgiving's coming up, Christmas is coming up, all this kind of thing. And we have this ability at this time of the year to sort of be like, even if we know we're going to be overwhelmed by family and travel and all this kind of thing, it's like, oh, it's just a season. It's just a season. It's going to come and it's going to go. And yet when we get on the hamster wheel of growth, on the hamster wheel of pursuing success as an athlete, as an entrepreneur, whatever it may be, we don't look at it as a season, especially when you're in an Olympic sport like you were, like I was. The thing about Olympic sports that people forget to talk about is that there's no season. It's like a freaking 12-month slog. And you maybe get a week here and a week there. and you know, if it goes beyond a week, you are now getting behind the competition. So how do you create seasons within the season? How do you have training cycles where, you know, when I get to the end of this, I'm going to get a reprieve. I'm going to be able to just not be as intense, as all-encompassing. I may get a Friday night. I may get a Saturday night. I may get an afternoon off, whatever it might be. Those are points of the season right there. And we need to know that as entrepreneurs, as just human beings. We need to understand and create our lives around seasons. And I joked about it in this email that I sent out today is I need next week. I'm coming out of an 8-week season right now where I knew coming into it, I was going to have 3 keynotes. I was starting with 2 new clients. I was going on a retreat with Sigma. You know, I was doing all these different things. And at no point did I want to question the quality that I was bringing to all of those experiences. I wanted it to be elite. And I wanted to keep showing up as a phenomenal husband and a phenomenal father. I was coaching my son's kindergarten, pre-K soccer team.
Oh my gosh.
During that time. Talking about full circle of the interview right here. He's already got more talent than his dad at 4 years old.
Here we go.
But the fact of the matter is like you come to this point, and here I am heading to Disney next week for Thanksgiving. And I get to go on that trip knowing like, hey, you earned this week. You came into these 8 weeks knowing that these 8 weeks would be what they were going to be. And now you're out of them. Are you actually going to come out of it? Are you going to come out of it? And that's the trap. Right. Is that we find a reason to stay in it. We don't let ourselves come out of it for that 3, 4, 5 days. Even though I'm going to be at Disney with a 4-year and 5-year-old. Like, that ain't a break, people. That ain't a break. And a wife that loves Disney. But that's the, you know, just kind of listening to what you're saying here and the question, it's like, can we create those seasons to where we come out of it and we say, whatever the result, I'm coming out of the season and I'm going to actually start a new one off the back of this.
That's good.
As we come to the conclusion of this wonderful little episode here, so there's one question I do like to ask my guests, and it normally makes them extremely comfortable, so I'm being sarcastic. So, as you know, the name of the show is Wino with Rhino. That is my namesake. That is my nickname. Has been since I was a kid, and there's a reason I'm associated with Rhino. There's a whole story behind it. But as I've gotten older, there's an actual connection I have with the personality and behavioral traits of an actual rhinoceros, oddly enough. But they don't want to hear that from me because they've already heard it from me. What they might want to hear out there is, what is your animal and why? I love putting him on the spot. It never happens.
What a question. Oh my God.
Your kids are going to hear this, by the way. They can't wait to hear it.
Yes, they are. Okay. I'm gonna answer this with the animal that I actually described. No, not described. The animal that I actually used to name my training group at LSU for 3 years. Okay, so LSU are the Tigers. But I called my group Steve's Steeds. Steeds, as in horses.
Yeah.
We were sprinters. And I told them, I said, we need to be powerful, but we need to be majestic in how we do things. Okay? We need to be precise. We can't fall. If we fall, it's really hard to get up. All this kind of stuff. So I would describe myself, now my son would describe me more as a monkey because when he's a monkey, I'm a monkey. And so like that's kind of our little thing. He's 4, so it's just like some context there. But for me, when I look at like who I am and how I do things, like I do look at myself more as a horse in that regard. And the beauty of this whole thing, just to even add a deeper level of emotion to this, when I was my son's age, when I was 4, my dad would take me to the local track in Chester, England, where we grew up. And he would put me on his shoulders and he would just ask me to call out a number. He'd give me hey, there's 8 horses in this 1 to 8, pick one. And apparently I was good for like 75% winner. I was that good at 4. And so I was his lucky little thing. And for me, like it's weird even just being asked this question and being able to think about it on this level. And I'm probably giving you more than you were ever expecting now. But at the same time, like it does go as far back as that. Is for me, like when you think about the stories I've told you on this, like when you watch a racehorse, there's a conviction to the way they do things, and there's a directness to the way they do things, and there's a prowess to the way they do things, and there's a grace to the way they do things. And man, I pride myself on showing up like that every day. But like I said, the monkey part was just the silliness. Like I could have easily gone down that path with you too, but I think in terms of how I show up, I would have to answer it that way.
One of the most fascinating things about you is you had literally no clue that question was coming.
No idea.
But you are so well in tune with who you are and what your offer is. It's so refreshing and it's incredible. It's something that I think everyone should I aspire to in working with you. Like I want to make sure I have that clarity about myself. Like holy shit.
Well, just to be clear, it's taken a ton of work.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, like again, like it really has, but it's what makes it worth it, man. Like it really does. Like I think about being on a podcast like this and just being able to show up, and I think I've told you this privately, like I take pride in being the Steve Mellor I am right here is the Steve Mellor I'll be when I go home.
Yeah.
There's no other version of Steve. When I have to be a coach, of course I'm going to be a coach. When I have to be a dad, I have to be a dad. But the principles, the values, the way I show up, all that kind of thing, life's so much easier, and it's so less exhausting when you're having to not change who you are depending on the room that you're in.
Yeah, powerful stuff. You were such a great example and a very positive and inspiring role model for not just me, but for so many people out there. And hopefully this can touch even more people. And look, you can look this guy up. It's pretty easy. He's one of the top podcasts on all of the I mean, what number did you get up to?
We got up as high as 23, 24 this year on the self-improvement charts.
In the world?
Globally.
Yeah.
So,
in the galaxy even, I would say.
In the galaxy, yeah. I don't think they have them on Mars. I think they have a podcast on Mars.
Exactly. So, Steve, the Steed Mellor.
There you go.
As a parting gift, what I normally ask is for our guests to give some type of, very succinctly, like parting advice for budding entrepreneurs or budding leaders out there. But you've kind of already done that. I would like to make a little pivot with you, and maybe, and not to get overly like, too deep here, but send a message to your kids that maybe when they listen to this, not today, but in 10 or 20 years, or maybe they're sitting there with your grandkids going, hey, look what grandpa used to do. And like, I'm not asking you to give a dissertation, but like, what's something super important? What one thing, and I know you have 50 million things that you're going to continue to teach them. What's something you really want them to know about you and understand about you as they think about this episode or watch this episode when they're older? What's something you want them to think about you?
Man, I get an emotional. Come on now.
You can only pick one. You can only pick one.
I am excited 10, 20 years from now to be able to tell Eleanor Grace and Jacob Anthony that whatever it is they've gone on and achieved, I saw it before they saw it.
Wow.
I knew it was going to happen, and I'm just excited that they finally figured out a way to do it.
Holy shit. That is a mic drop, my man. Powerful, powerful stuff. I'm so honored that you agreed to come on this show. This has just been such a great experience, and I can't wait for it to air, my man. You're a gift. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you, brother. Thank you.
Cheers.